Hi, everybody. Professor Christina here to talk about return on ad spend, or ROAS. Some people pronounce it ROAS, ROAS, whatever you call it. When we think about return on ad spend, we're seeing something that is common to most marketing metrics. It's a measure of inherently difficult to measure activities. Marketing metrics at their core aim to measure human behavior. Analytics, such as the number of seconds a consumer spends on a website, can be very precise. Other metrics, such as return on ad spend or ROAS, can show broad trends. Tools to measure consumer behavior are getting more accurate every day. However, it's important to remember with any marketing metrics that they are seldom as precise as, for instance, measuring your height with a tape measure. They are meant to give concrete information on the general direction of a company's growth or the overall effectiveness of its marketing. Measures of human activity are inherently less precise than measures of inanimate objects. Accuracy is important. However, once an analyst has achieved the best precision possible, it's important to understand that metrics have value even if they cannot capture every facet of a phenomenon. Let's take an example. Imagine you run a movie production company's marketing campaigns. Typically, you spend millions of dollars on specific campaigns for each movie to promote it. What if the movie's production company cut its marketing budget by half next year? It decides to do without movie posters, TV ads, and Facebook. Leadership's reasoning might be that although revenue went up when they created many ads, they cannot know what exact ad led to the most sales, so they will stop much of their advertising. What do you think would happen to movie ticket sales? The production company might well find its sales are lower. If its sales are reduced by half in the exact same year that its ad spending is cut by half, or its marketing spending is cut by half, that would be a pretty good indicator that advertising has an effect on sales. If it keeps increasing and decreasing its ad spend for several years quite dramatically, and each time sees a corresponding growth or decline in ticket revenue, it will have clear evidence that it is advisable to spend on advertising. The production company may never be able to prove what exact ad inspired every single moviegoer, but the data is still extremely valuable for developing business strategy. So with that preamble, let's talk about return on ad spend for just a minute. Return on ad spend is essentially a measure of how many multiples of what you invest in advertising comes back to you. So let's say you spend $2,000 on advertising, and that brings in customers who spend $5,000 with you. $1,000 of that is your expenses, so you make $4,000 in profit. That means you have doubled your investment in the advertising. Remember, you spent $2,000 and you made $4,000 off of that advertising. The customers can be clearly attributed to the advertising, and they spent double what you invested in acquiring them through the advertising. That is a simple way of describing what return on ad spend measures. With that preamble, though, you now know it's not that simple. You can't always attribute an ad's expenditures to a particular sale. However, in general, if you look in aggregate at how much you spent on an advertising campaign and then how much profit that generated, you can get a good approximation of return on ad spend. Now, some marketers are forced to use revenue versus profit. And in fact, in the book, we often talk about revenue. This is because if you're a marketing agency, many of your clients cannot or will not share the profitability of each individual product. All you have as a number to work off of is the revenue that the advertising has generated. You can then calculate return on ad spend using revenue. But regardless of whether you use revenue or profit, you're just looking at the money that came in as a multiplier, as a multiple of how much you invested in advertising. Now, why is it okay to use revenue, right? It's not as precise. And we've talked in other videos about why you want to, if you can, identify which particular products are most profitable. That's because you're really looking at, again, a rough measure of what particular advertising generated what dollars coming into your organization. And it's a comparative metric. If you're trying to make precise financial calculations, you obviously want to look at profit versus revenue when you calculate return on ad spend. However, oftentimes, especially on the agency side, what you're doing when you calculate return on ad spend is you're simply trying to compare different advertising campaigns to see which one generated the most dollars in revenue. Let's say, for instance, you spent $10,000 on an Instagram ad campaign and $10,000 on a Google Ads campaign. One generated $1 million in sales and one generated $100,000 in sales. Clearly, unless those $1 million in sales were of the lowest margin products and the $100,000 in sales were on the highest margin products, even if you don't know the exact profit generated, the $1 million in sales revenue probably means that the ROAS of those Instagram ads was significantly higher than the ROAS of the Google Ads campaign. So if you have only got access to revenue, as many marketers do, you can still use ROAS as a comparative metric, an approximation of what is the actual financial return on ad spend. If you can go a little deeper and use profit, all the better. So that's a little bit about return on ad spend. Stated simply, it's an imprecise measure because you will never know the exact touch points that delivered every single penny of every single sale coming into your organization. It's a little bit more imprecise because sometimes you need to use revenue rather than profit. But it's a way of identifying the extent to which every dollar that you're investing in advertising is coming back to you in sales. And if you think of it as simply a way of understanding for how much I invest in advertising, how much can I expect to come back in sales, return on ad spend is one of the most valuable metrics in all of marketing and always worth calculating. This is Christina Inge signing off, and I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you in a future video. In the meantime, happy marketing.